Malaju.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the EV Puzzle. We're in an eNiro today. At last, Kia PR have managed to organise through my local dealer, Norfolk Motor Group. So thank you very much to Norfolk Motor Group and Tim especially for letting me borrow this car for the entire day. It's quite difficult to get hold of one of these eNiros on an extended lengthy test. What I wanted to do was, as a Kona owner and for somebody that's considered all the electric cars that are out there, and I've bought the Kona, what do I think of the eNiro and how does it compare? Where is it better? Where is it worse? So today's video, I want to cover what I think are the differences and the different experience of the car. How does it feel different, look different? And when you're driving it, what are the technical differences between it, between the Kona and the eNiro? So that somebody trying to decide between the two, if you can't get out for test drives, hopefully then I can detail enough unbiased, objective advice as to which car is different in what way, rather than which car is better. I'll of course tell you what my personal choice is, and at the moment I've just driven 96 miles in this. Do you know, it's really hard to say which I would prefer. So there's a windshield sticker on this car that says it's £37,080 on the road, so that must be before the UK grant of £3,500, but £37,080. I paid 32.5, I think, for my Kona Electric, but then they added about 3,000 on, didn't they? So I think the list price now is 38.5. I think this eNiro is about £1,500, £2,000 cheaper than the equivalent Kona Electric. And model-wise, well, this first edition Kia eNiro is the only model that they're selling. So this is it. This is the price of the electric eNiro. Whereas in the Kona, there are multiple models. There's the SE, which they don't seem to sell very much, if at all. But then there's the Premium or the Premium SE. And there is the 39 kilowatt hour or the 64 kilowatt hour version in the Kona. In the eNiro, you don't have that. So this eNiro seems to fit halfway between a Premium Kona and a Premium SE Kona. It's spec-wise, it's pretty much the same as a Premium, but then it's got leather seats on top, where the Premium Kona doesn't have electric seats. It has ordinary cloth seats and manually adjusted seats. In this one, it's manually adjusted passenger seat, but it's electrically adjusted driver's seat. So it's like that halfway house between the two models of the Kona Premium and the Kona Premium SE. That's where it seems to fit for me. So it shouldn't be as expensive as the Premium SE Kona, but it should be more expensive than the Premium Kona, and that is exactly where it's priced. Before I even started this video, I must confess I was biased, and I was biased against not the eNiro, but some of the press around the eNiro. One of the things that absolutely bugged me at the time when it came out was What Car's Car of the Year 2019. For me, it's not that it got Car of the Year. That's not what bothers me. What bothers me is their justification for it and their description of why it should be Car of the Year. And that, to me, was very unfair against the Kona, because, well, the Kona was released in 2018, so my gut feeling is Car of the Year 2019 had to be a car released in 2019, and that's more why the eNiro got the award than the Kona, because What Car's justification is that it's a car for everyone, it's a car priced for everyone, and it fits everyone's lives. And they're saying like it's a breakthrough car, a game-changing car, because it's the first car that is priced at this level that's practical and suitable for everyone. So I'll put on the screen the exact words that they used. But I don't think that's true, because in the UK there's only this one model of the eNiro. So how can this be priced best for the functionality and for what it's delivered as a car when the Kona 64 in premium spec is cheaper? So that's a more reasonably priced, available for more people because it is cheaper. And again, What Car have said about the size, that it's practically spacious enough for everyone's everyday lives. Well, okay, it's bigger. It is bigger than a Kona, but by how much? It's a couple of centimetres here and there. I can definitely feel it on the width to the window here on the door. In my Kona, I can put my elbow out and I can rest my elbow while I'm driving comfortably. In this, do you know, it's just a centimetre or two too far away. It's just not quite the same. You can feel that it's got more width on the inside of the cabin. So for me, actually, that extra space on elbow room isn't quite right for me. But it's just that centimetre or 2 centimetres difference. Putting Cracker's dog bed in the back, again, it's just a couple of centimetres difference. The only differences that I've seen in space is perhaps a couple of centimetres either side and a couple of centimetres depth-wise. And the rake angle of the seat backs seems to be more upright in this eNiro, whereas in the Kona it's sloped more. So as I'm pushing Cracker's bed in, the back of the bed does angle more towards the boot lid, as you can see here. So to say that it's a bigger car, I just don't necessarily agree. It's not like the Kona's not adequate for a family, because of course you can. Now some people would say, oh, but the eNiro's got more space in the back, it's got more legroom for more adults, and you know, your children have got more space. Well, for goodness sake, in the 70s a family car was a Mini and you'd get 5 people in the back of it. How much space do you want and do you need? And if big is the answer, well, there are a lot of cars much bigger than the eNiro. So just because it's big doesn't make it better. It makes it slightly different, and I think that's the view that I would like to portray to you, that for a lot of reviews I've seen, the eNiro comes out better against the Kona because of its size. It is bigger, it is more practical. And the thing that I can say that I think is true is getting in and out of the car, there is just a little bit more room. So as you're getting in through the doors, you're not catching yourself as much on the trim. It does seem just slightly bigger apertures. So this eNiro is probably better suited to a bigger person. It is a bigger car, just marginally, but it makes a difference. But if you're not a big person, then why do you need a bigger car? The inside goes the same way as well. I find the interior finish of the Hyundai slightly better in quality than the eNiro. The trim is much blacker and darker in the eNiro. For me, the eNiro has a more traditional, older look to it, whereas the Kona has a more contemporary look and feel to it. It's slightly more light and airy. Even though it's supposed to be a black interior, it's really dark grey, and it just seems a little bit more modern, and the mixture of materials they've used seems less random. Some people will like the eNiro and some people will like that blackness, and some people won't. So quickly going back to the main obvious reasons. So one is colour. What I've noticed is the colours for sale in the eNiro, you've got black, dark grey, dark blue and white. There used to be a brown, but that's about it. In the Kona Electric, you get this bright, dazzling acid yellow, and you get tangerine orange and pulse red and ceramic blue, much lighter shades. Now in Europe, yes, you get black and dark night, you get extra colours in the Kona abroad, but here in the UK, it appears that you get white or dark shades for the eNiro. But in the Kona, you get more bright, vibrant shades. But noise is a big one. In social media and a lot of reviews, it's talked a lot that the eNiro is quieter, and it is, and most of it, from what I can see and hear, is the tyres. The rumble from the road, and you can really feel and hear it, is very different in the eNiro. It is a quieter, more comfortable ride in the eNiro than it is the Kona, and that's mostly because of the tyres. So what a mistake, Hyundai. What a terrible mistake putting those Nexons on and not gaining that quite large difference between the two. So yeah, I'm sure changing for a softer tyre, for a quieter tyre, will make a big difference to the Kona. And while on the subject of noise, the virtual engine sound, VES, it is different between the two. The Kona sounds more high-pitched, and it could just be my sensitive hearing, but it annoys me more in the Kona. It is more high-pitched and it is more prominent in the cabin. In the eNiro, it was a lower pitch tone, and I didn't notice it as much in the cabin. So either it's better positioned, better protected, and sound deadened or whatever, so the sound is outside but not inside the car, or it's just the pitch of it. But I preferred the VES sound of the eNiro. It bothered me less. The horn as well, the horn is a two-tone, nice sounding horn in the eNiro, and it's a pathetic, awful sound in the Kona. So sound-wise, the eNiro wins all round. Right, so interior-wise, what have I found so far? Now, this isn't going to be an exhaustive list because obviously, you know, I've only just done 96 miles on the car, but this is the stuff I've noticed straight away that I can see is different. The center console area, so I'll put some images up of that now, to me is much better designed in this eNiro. The circular knob for changing between reverse, neutral and drive. Initially, you know, I sort of prefer the buttons of the Kona, but I suspect I would just get used to it, and there's no difference between that. But the positioning of the buttons for the heated seats, the heated steering wheel and the drive modes are much further forward, and they're much more ergonomically placed, much easier to use. In the Kona you have to more look down and move your hand down to get to them, so not quite so good. USBs, there seems to be an extra USB in here. There's 2 plus the 12-volt socket at the front, and both are accessible. Where in the Kona, one is accessible, which is the one you use for Android Auto and your media USB, and the other's inaccessible under the under tray, which you can't really access. The third one in this eNiro is inside the armrest here. The Kona seems to have a bigger storage area on the armrest area, but you can see that the eNiro has designed it for more space for the cup holders. And the fact that the cup holders retract, as you can see here, really means that it's a multifunctional space. So when you're not using it to hold your coffee, you can use it for other things. So it's a really nice multifunctional space. I do like the design of this center area in the eNiro. It is better than the Kona. What else then? The power button I like is in a better place. It's just slightly higher up and it's more accessible. I prefer it there. The media controls for media, nav, map, radio, seek and the star button, those are further down below the media screen, and that's really nice. I like those. For the left hand side on the Kona, left of the screen, those buttons, they're just slightly out of reach. You've got to have really long arms or lean forward to get to those buttons on the screen. So I think ergonomically the buttons are better placed in the eNiro. But those exact same buttons do look and feel a little cheaper in my mind in the eNiro. So although they're in better positions, they just feel a little cheaper to me. Might be because they're dark black, not dark grey like in the Kona, I'm not quite sure, but that's a difference. On the climate controls, talking about button, one of the ones I like is this button here, which changes the direction of the air. You've got a down and up arrow on it, meaning that you can toggle between the modes up and down, whereas in the Kona you keep having to press the button to rotate through the menu. You can't go backwards and forwards, you just rotate it through it in one way. Other than that, you know, the climate, the media, the sat nav, all of that feels exactly the same. Air vents on the inside of this eNiro, I've commented before in my video about the plug-in hybrid version of this car. The air vents are nicer, they look better quality. There's too many mixtures of materials going on in my opinion, but the functionality of the air vent, that it turns on and off and moves with 2 separate controls, it makes for a much better air vent. But on the subject of air, because the dash is flatter and the windscreen seems to be further away, it seems to be more spacious here on the eNiro, airflow seems to be better, so that you don't get this cold breeze as much when you've got cold air coming in through the car. In the Kona you seem quite closer to the screen, and the front center and front windscreen airflow seems to bring a cold chill onto your face more than the eNiro. The dash display is very, very different between the two. They've got the same pieces of functionality in the same screens, but they've jumbled it all up and moved it around and used different fonts. So for example, the driver information display normally displays on the right hand side on the Kona Electric. In the eNiro it's centrally placed, so it's between the 2 round dials. On the Kona you've got 3 modes of Eco, Comfort and Sport. In the eNiro you've got exactly the same modes, Eco, Normal and Sport, but as you change them the dash displays don't vary very much at all. The dials and the circles all stay the same, just marginally different colouring, but the functionality of the dials seems to be very, very similar. Whereas in the Kona, the functionality of the dials goes from power meters to miles per hour and changes a lot more. Here on the eNiro, the GOM display stays in a very large number on the left-hand circular dial. On the Kona, it's in the centre of the speedometer dial when you're in comfort mode, but when you're in eco mode, it pops up to the top right-hand corner of the dash. So things move around more and change more dramatically as you change drive modes in the Kona. The Kona has that multi-ring efficiency aid, which shows you the amount of throttle that you're using versus the amount of throttle that you could or should be using for the terrain that you're driving on at the time. The eNiro doesn't really have that. It's got the same sort of battery gauge on the left hand side where it's on the right hand side of the Kona. It's got the same sort of power and charge dial on the left hand side of the dash here, and that's similar in functionality but just looking slightly different than the Kona. And also the amount of regen that you're getting. You get that display in eco mode, but it's only in eco mode on the eNiro that you get that. You don't see it in normal, and you don't see it in sport either. How many point whatever miles have you gained on regen? The font, the fonts. On the dash display, I'd say the font for the driver information just looks slightly more attractive in the eNiro. But the font for the main numbers for the GOM and the speed display that you're doing, I don't understand why it looks so blocky, so old, so retro looking digital dash when it's completely digital. They could have had any font and any design they liked, and it doesn't look as nice. So I think that just that piece on its own is a good example of how the Kona and the eNiro are the same but different. The dash displays sum it all up really. They're exactly the same in the functionality that they're delivering, but they're just delivering it in slightly different ways. Generally, the button feel very, very similar. So the steering wheel controls feel the same. The plastic for the little toggles here does feel cheaper and more plasticky, but it might just be the finish, because the finish in the Kona has got like a painted metallic cover over the top, so the physical material might be the same underneath, but they're not as tactile. They feel cheaper here in the eNiro. The buttons feel more flush in the eNiro on the steering wheel, whereas they're slightly more pronounced in the Kona. Basically exactly the same controls, they're just slightly different. The paddles look the same from when they're in front of you, but at the back of the paddles for the regeneration on the eNiro, there's a ribbed area, and that basically gives a texture, a feel, where in the there's something scratchy to grab hold of behind it, whereas in the Kona it's completely smooth. So it's the same control, it's the same thing, but it's just been produced just slightly different to make the cars different. You've got the sun visors here. They basically look exactly the same, but in this eNiro it doesn't pull out on a slide to go further back, whereas in the Kona it does. I understood that the eNiro was supposed to have coasting guidance control, so something that would link into sat-nav, predict the road ahead, and give you a indication whether you should be letting off the throttle and coasting, so to aid efficiency. Well, I can't find it. I've looked through all the menus and I've looked as hard as I can on the screen while safely driving, and I can't see anything that looks different at all from the Kona. So either I'm being rather silly and missing it, or it's not here. I will continue to look, and when I get home I'll try and read the manual and look online, see if I can find it out. But it was something I was expecting as a difference between them, and it's not here. There's no heads-up display in this one, for example. The Kona Electric in mine, the Premium SE, that has a heads-up display that powers up out of the dash. That's not on here. That's not on the eNiro. Ventilated seats. You get ventilated seats on the Premium SE in the Kona. They're not here. They're just heated seats on the eNiro. LED headlights and the daytime running lights are very, very different. The daytime running lights are lower down here on the car. In the Kona, they're higher up. Which you prefer as aesthetics, and which you think looks nicer and prettier, then your own opinion. But the main headlights, they're halogen in this eNiro, and they are LED in the Premium SE Kona. And as from my experience in the Kona, they are absolutely brilliant as LED lights in the Kona. So yeah, LED lights being missing on the eNiro, that's a big thing, especially if you're night driving. Drivability though, how does it drive? This is a heavier car than the Kona, and can you feel it? Yeah, marginally. There's not a lot of difference in its feel, but it does feel slightly heavier and slightly softer. It does cover the bumps better. So if you're looking for a comfortable car that covers rough road and potholes better, the eNiro is better at that than the Kona. But the Kona just feels tighter. Steering is just very marginally tighter. The cornering, the seats hug you more, the suspension feels a little firmer. It's just a few different settings for sportiness, shall we say. So I think the eNiro is more designed as family comfort and practicality, where the Kona is more youth and vibrance and dynamic driving. But you know, they're not huge distance apart. They're very, very similar, but one is slightly softer. The eNiro is slightly softer and the Kona is slightly firmer. And the same goes for how the mapping of the throttle goes. I've tried both Eco, Comfort, Normal and Sport, and I feel that the Kona is just sharper. So even in sport mode, you're flooring the throttle, it thumps you in the back just a bit more, it comes on instantaneously. There is a little more lag on this eNiro, so it's a softer introduction to that power. And yeah, it is. It's slightly slower to 0 to 60. It is slightly heavier. So I guess all those factors make a difference. But in all three of the modes, it does feel smoother in this eNiro. It's a bit sharper in the Kona. Only by small degrees, but it's a very marginal difference between them. So one of the big things that we've noticed on the car so far is we've done 96 miles to get here and we've done 5 miles per kilowatt hour. I did give a couple of squirts of acceleration in sport mode, whereas I didn't in my 300-mile trip over to this same location. So I've come over here to Woodhall Spa so I can test the efficiency difference between the Kona, which I did in my last video about 300 miles and having covered it. So I've done the same 96 miles and I've only got 5 miles per kilowatt hour in this eNiro. It's not quite as good range-wise, but if I now look at all those things I've just covered, and what I know now, which car would I have side by side if there wasn't a price difference and I could just take one of the cars home and keep from now on, which would I take? I am reluctant to say I would take the eNiro. I think I would want to keep my Kona. I've become attached to it and I like the efficiency especially and the sportiness of it. I don't really care that much about those couple of extra centimetres here and there. The ergonomics of inside, yeah, I sort of miss that, and that's the pull that I sort of wouldn't mind considering the eNiro because of the inside and the ergonomics. But Susan, on the other hand, as a passenger, has said pretty instantly she would swap the Kona and have the eNiro, the little traitor. She thinks the interior is much nicer. I don't think there's a big difference between them. It really is a question of which you prefer the look of and what your priorities are. If your priorities are performance and handling, then the Kona is better for you. If having more space in the back for passengers is more important to you, especially if you're going to be a taxi driver, then an eNiro is much better for you. As for the aesthetics inside, well, I guess it depends if you prefer black or dark grey. This is a perfectly adequate interior. A little bit eclectic use of materials. There's piano black, there's satin silver, there's satin grey, there's grey plastic, black plastic, different shapes and colours of it. There's leather with white stitching. It's a bit all over the place. It's not... It's only the look of it. It's much more practical. It's more practical, did you say? Yeah. It's more space to store things. I wouldn't say there's more space. It is more practical. The space that's here is more practical to use in this centre area. But you know, is that worth a couple of £1,000 difference? So to summarise, I think basically the Hyundai Kona and the Kia eNiro are basically the same car. They've got the same motor, the same power, the same options, the same software, the same lane keeping. It's basically the same car and very similar spec levels. Just slight differences between the two, but they're effectively the same. They're very similarly priced. The warranty difference between the Kia and the Hyundai, yeah, there's a couple of years longer on the Kia. But to try and sum up the differences between the two, they're just in different body shells. The Kona looks different to the eNiro, and it's which do you prefer as the best. The interiors, yeah, they're very differently designed. Even though it's got the same stuff, the same functionality and the same buttons, it does look and feel slightly different. So it's more about which you prefer. I bet some people prefer the interior of the Kona, and I bet some people prefer the interior of the eNiro. There isn't a huge significant difference between the two. So, as in, how would you describe the cars and who they benefit more? Well, I think that big difference is the slight tendency to be slightly more sporty and firmer ride in the Kona, versus the eNiro is definitely softer and more comfortable. It rides the bumps better. It is a smoother, quieter ride. The fact that you get Michelin tyres on to start with as well is a really big help. Efficiency and range wise though, we'll see when we get to the end of this test. When I arrive back at the dealership, I'll post up the differences, but it looks like the Kona is more efficient. Which is best? I don't think either one is best. I think it's a very close call between them. Susan would prefer the eNiro. I would rather keep my Kona. Anyway, thanks for watching everyone, thanks for subscribing. I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope it was helpful in your decisions if you're thinking of these two cars, and take care. See you again soon. Bye bye.